Hi guys! Welcome to our podcast. We're your English professors, and today we're going to be discussing our book, Language Awareness, from Chapter 2. My name is Julian Powell.
I'm Evelyn Cortez.
I'm Jasenia Martinez.
I'm Amaya Chow.
And today we're going to dive deep down into Language Awareness, 13th edition, in Chapter 2. So while reading the book, I've noticed Chapter 2, it discusses a lot of topics. It teaches students how to become better college writers. It teaches different techniques. There's different cultures when it comes to writing. We get a story and input on someone's life and their form of writing, which also expresses more details about writing. So I feel like this book is a really good way to teach students how to become better college writers, more like an instruction book.
Mm-hmm. And for the instruction part, what stood out to me was the informal and formal writing because I needed a refresher on that. Yeah.
For me, it was about the three purposes. I definitely needed a reminder on that about the expressions, the feelings, the way that you're writing your words is, how certain words that you use is going to be the way that you express whatever the topic may be. That way your audience understands of how you're feeling. On top of that, the persuasion about how you're going to, hook them into the reading or the writing, as well as the information you want to give the proper information and not just something that has nothing to do with the topic. So those three purposes were a great reminder of what to look into when you're writing whatever it may be.
I found that when a professor gives you a topic to write about and says, when given your own choice to write a topic to discuss about, it could be hard to think of a specific topic that you want to narrow down to. So I found it helpful that you could use different methods to generate ideas about what your topic is, and using methods like brainstorming, open-ended questioning, or clustering.
Yeah, definitely. So you're saying there's a lot of different techniques of styles of writing that they teach in the book.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. And which technique do you think that stood out to you the most?
For me, I would use the form of clustering, where I would select a key word or term that I would use, and from that I would stem ideas or thoughts that come to mind, so that I could further develop questions and ideas to get about.
No, yeah. So basically, you're saying just to kind of jot down a bunch of ideas and see what can relate to the writing. So kind of like, if you're writing something about a counseling project, you can write different ideas that relate to counseling, basically. Okay, that's cool. I think that's a good way of writing for sure. I think a technique that stood out to me the most was the open-ended style of writing. So basically, while you're writing your essay, for students who are out there writing their essay, they can take breaks, between their writing, and then they use that time to analyze their writing and proofread. They can use it to think, what can I add more to the essay, what they can add more to their story. And I feel like it can give more of an open mind to the students who are writing that essay. So I feel like that's a good technique to do.
And I feel like we're a little different on that. For me, instead of, jotting key points or just ideas, I prefer just to go ahead and go for it. I won't stop writing. I'll just keep writing. It's, I think it's just called free writing for that method. And you just keep going. And then afterwards, when I have everything jotted down, then I'll go back. And then I'll go back and then look at the key terms or what the topic may be about, because that's just how my brain works better, for me at least.
Me as well, the free writing is what works best for me, and I think is what works better for most students.
I agree on that.
Yeah.
So you guys basically just, if you're writing, you just one day grab a sheet of paper or go on your computer and just start writing whatever, basically.
Then you could just go back and edit or add things, and it just becomes more easier instead of
Do you guys teach this to your students in your guys' classes? Do you feel like they can learn from this?
Yes, I don't know if you guys remember, but when we were in our own English class, our professor, I'm trying to remember her name, I think it was Kelly Dorch. I remember the first day of school, or the second time that we were there, she made us write. It was for homework, when you wrote for 10 minutes straight. You guys remember that?
I think so, yeah. I think I know what you're talking about,
right?
yeah.
And then after that, ever since, I was I don't know why I've never done this before. I'm always the one to look at all the info needed, or all the books, all the info, and then I'll go back and forth to the information that I need. But then I feel if I just free write it and then just keep writing nonstop, like my brain just, like at first it's really hard at the beginning when you don't know what to write. So just me doing that, and then I'll just like change it up in my own way. So I feel like that technique is a really good technique for students, instead of having to like look for the info, doing the bubbles, and then for me it's a kind of a time of waste in my eyes. And I feel like the students prefer doing the whole like just just writing whatever it is and then going back to it.
So be more like a free thinking style of writing, you know, just to get out there and just go write. So I feel like that's a good way of writing too, because it shows a passion, you know. And what we're here to teach our students how to be not only better writers, but we also want to, you know, extort a passion from them. We want to see how they feel. We want them to create the story, because remember, everyone is creative. And then when it comes to writing an essay, that's the best way I feel like to express creativity. It's a form of art. So I feel like that's a good technique, for sure, free writing. I also noticed brainstorming is a good idea too. You know, you can just gather around, get more ideas on what you can add as your essay.
And as in your class, what technique do you recommend? Like, what method do you recommend for your students to use?
In my class, I recommend, I'll definitely recommend the free writing, but I actually recommend the open ending. I feel like that's the one I feel like I relate to the most.
Is it because you kind of like, because I feel like it's yours is between the Amaya's choice as a professor and mine, because you're like free writing, but you're also taking that little break, thinking about it, and then going ahead to it. Like, what do you think benefits that one compared to like doing her method and then you doing our method?
Well, what benefits is writing can be long. It can be kind of tiring. It can be strenuous. I feel like, because with open-ended, it mainly focuses and structurizes around the breaks and what you do with those breaks. So when you take those breaks between writing, it can restart your mind. It can refresh your mind, because the mind can only work so hard. It's kind of like an engine, and then sooner or later it's going to get tired. So after that, you just got to refresh your mind, kind of like with your clustering. You know how you say you can just jot down other ideas? So when you're out, you know, when your mind's on rest, you can think of other ideas, basically. So it's kind of like a clustering in your head. And then when you come back to your essay, then you can add more of those ideas, more refreshed start.
I'm going to have to try that one out.
Definitely teach it with your students. How would you recommend a technique for your students?
I would do free writing, like I said earlier. I think that's what works best for them. Like, it gives them the option, or like you just write what you're thinking about the topic, and later you can also do research on it if you feel like you're not as informed on it, and so you can know your audience more.
Okay, so in the book, we've noticed we get a perspective about a story, you know, a student write in the book about a girl her age. You know, she was around 3rd grade. She gets in trouble in class because she uses a slur word. It was kind of a racial battle in her class, and she noticed the way she explained it is she gives us her experience in 3rd grade, and then she also gives experience how it changes her in the future. What kind of style or technique would you notice that was in that story?
I would say it's chronological order. So she basically goes from her 3rd grade, like you said, and then to now, and her perspective is changed. So she developed, basically.
And like her technique and all is all her way of writing is coming from the book itself. You know, the way that she's writing this book, it shows her expression, how she was feeling during this time, and her persuasive way of writing it as well, just to keep those audience engaged, I feel like, because this book does mention those 3 purposes.
I think she does well, like explaining like her thought process at the time and her experience. Like, that's part of like expressing your in the terms of writing.
Yeah. So basically, I've noticed while in that essay, it's kind of like we get some sort of like cultural dialect. She's kind of writing a story about her past, and she also is kind of like writing a story in a perspective of how it changes her now. Would you guys say that in the book we've noticed there's different cultures of writing and there's different perspectives? Would you guys say when reading or learning old books, would you get a different perspective from like a book that was written hundreds of years ago, and you can translate that today?
I would say yes. Generations are changing little by little. And I feel like if we still use the same formatting from the past, it's not going to make too much sense for those that, writing just changes throughout the years. And I feel like if we're using something way back in our times, it's not gonna be as understanding to them. It's like, for example, like just like the Bible, of how throughout the Bible it changes. Like, I know there's a book called I don't know what I'm saying at this point.
No, but yes, with the Bible, yeah, the Bible does seem to change. You know, like the language gets lost in translation. That's why we have different, you know, translations. There's, you know, we have the NIV, you know, we have the King James versions. So basically, it's with those versions, I feel like people who read certain versions is, you know, not just because it's based on reading level, but it's also based on, like we said, translation, or people want to get somewhat of how we interpret it, you know, like a cultural dialect. So how they ever spoke back then, or like in the old-fashioned, you know, Shakespeare's books, the way they spoke back then, we have them translated for people today. I feel like when we translate a book, we can still give the newer generation
the same understanding.
The same understanding.
Basically, like, copy and paste the book, but change it into the new generation's way.
Yes.
Because we, you know, the audience is what they're reading.
It keeps changing.
And
also.
it just keeps changing. And if our students are reading something way back then, they're not really going to understand it. But if you write it in their words or their own definitions, they'll 100% understand it.
They'll be more engaged probably too.
Engaged.
They'll be more engaged. I feel like, you know, just because people still want to learn old cultures, but they want to be able to translate it. Because if it's a language that they really can't understand, how can they understand the book?
To be able to keep it interesting.
So it keeps it interesting, it keeps the audience engaged.
And wanting to know more.
Continuing with our culture and language, what do you think is lost? What is lost when a language becomes extinct? How does that benefit us, and what takes that away from us?
Let me think. That's a good question, actually.
And I found this from the book as well. I thought that was a really good question that I wanted to share with you guys.
So what would be, okay, so to answer your question, yes, I feel like, you know, if a language is lost or extinct, we can lose a big sense on a lot of when it comes to writing. So say like a theme that was chosen by a lot of, you know, old-fashioned famous authors, you know, and we lose that style of language, that style of thinking, we can never really grasp what they really thought, and we can't add that to our own life or to our own essays. So for college writers, I feel like it's important to learn all languages, you know, all cultural languages, you know, when it comes to writing, because we need a variety.
The culture is lost.
The culture is lost. It's lost. We need a variety when it comes to writing, and I think our students should really benefit from that.
It's new, like, when it's lost, you don't have new views to further your own, or like new views that people had, you know?
So do you guys think that we should bring that language back into us? Like, for me especially, I miss the poems. I feel like poems have a lot of secrets and hidden messages that I feel like if we were to bring those poems now to our students, they're not going to understand what the poem may be about.
Well, like we were saying, translating is the best option, so they could understand and be more engaged. Because for me personally, when I was reading poems back then, I wasn't really engaged. I was like, what is even going on right now?
Really? And I love poems.
But when my teacher would like decipher it or anything, I was like, oh,
like by line, more, and then we talk about each line's definition.
I think it's important for us as professors to keep our students engaged and to keep that cultural aspect for them, because if we want them to be successful, they need to gain, you know, knowledge from all different cultures, all different styles of writing, all different styles of techniques for them to become better writers. So to wrap up this, you know, to our podcast, what was one thing you guys would give to your students to become better college writers, or for future students who want to become better college writers?
I would say remember who your audience is and the way that you're going to express whatever the topic may be about. The audience is important. You can't talk about something they're not going to be engaged in, because they're not going to get hooked into what the topic or writing may be about, as well as making sure you're expressing your feelings with certain phrases and words or key terms, and keeping in mind of your format of writing. There's so many ways, and we all gave different ways, but definitely giving those options and not just giving them one technique.
What would you tell to your students, or for future college writers?
Well, I would say do research. That's the first thing. And then you could worry about the formatting later, like the book says. So that chapter specifically is very helpful in formatting. So that's what we recommend.
I would say, going based off what you said about addressing the audience, I would say just remembering to keep an open mind, because we could get lost in thought, like, about what our perspective is and what we want to, like, argue or persuade, and so we get lost in, like, who the audience is and what their arguments may be, or if they have an open mindset, or if they're more, like, reserved to their own thoughts and, like, don't want to, not as persuade. So you want to, like, keep in mind, like, what terms or phrases that you're using.
Definitely. I feel like, I agree. I would use that for new future college writers. Again, I would like to go back to the open-ended technique. I feel like that's a good way just for people to become a better writer, and then also to add the cultural grasp, so they can gain more knowledge. I feel like to be an important writer, it needs to come from, like, the soul. It needs to come from your heart. It needs to be with a passion. And I think that should be our goal when it comes to teaching our students or for future people, so they can become a better writer and they can feel that aspect in their life, so it makes them more successful when it comes to writing.
Yeah, I think this book has taught us a lot and kept us refreshed about the meaning of writing and what's so important about it and how to make it even better.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Effective.
This was a great book overall. Thank you for listening to our podcast. I'm Professor Julian.
Evelyn Cortez.
Chisanya.
Amaya Chow.
And we're English professors. Thank you for listening. Class dismissed.